Hey, y'all, welcome to Militantly Mixed, the podcast about race and identity from the mixed race perspective. I am your host, Charmaine Fury, the busiest mixed race, gender, bisexual, polyamorous, atheist, comic book nerd, cat mom, and two-time Asian American Podcast Association's Golden Crane Award winning podcaster in this podcasting game. And this is our third episode of the Mixed Auntie Confidential series that we now include every month. And my co host today, of course, is, this direction. Boop. Auntie TaRessa Stovall. Why don't you introduce yourself and then we'll get into our topic today.
Hey fam, how are y'all doing? This is Mixed Auntie TaRessa. And so I've launched my blog on Substack. So it's mixedauntie.substack, all one word.com. Mixed Auntie Confidential. So swing on by, check it out. Let me know what you think. There's free subscriptions and paid subscriptions. So you have different options, different levels of, and just want to talk about all things mixed. As you know, my favorite mixed podcaster, Mane here, and fellow auntie. And we come together to chop it up with you, right? We come together to chop up the things, and we all know, I think the good news is mixedness is finally has a public presence, an ongoing sustained public conversation. You know, goddess knows, social media of all sorts ongoing. So there's always something, right? There's always something to talk about, think about, something that might challenge us or something we might want to challenge, right? So I'm here with my girl Mane to give you mixed aunties on all kinds of cool things. So we're going to chop it up today for March.
And today our topic was just off of a couple conversations we've had is this did not compute. Something, some interaction, something you saw on TV, online, on social media that just didn't compute. And I'll start today with an incident that I had in the airport yesterday that showed me a bias I had that I didn't know I had. And yeah, so I'll just tell the story. So yesterday I went to the airport to pick up a friend of mine who was flying in from out of town, and I had to go potty. So I parked my car to go while they were, going through immigration and all that kind of stuff, and ran to the potty. When I do this, I encounter a middle-aged or slightly older white couple, like what I would describe as a very rural white farm country looking white couple. And with them was a very cute, maybe 8 to 9 year old, I'm not really good with ages, lighter skinned black girl, not super light, but would count as light skinned black girl. And my first thing that happened to me, and my body went warm and I got nervous and I thought, that did not compute. Like that little girl with that particular couple with their aesthetic and her aesthetic did not compute. And then a second after that, I noted that her hair was a mess. And then I calmed down. And I thought, oh, maybe that's her adopted parents or her grandparents, since it was a white couple. So as in not necessarily a biracial child, but possibly, I don't know. And then my third thought was, mind your business. So I kept walking to go to the potty because I had to do what I got to do. But it stopped me. It paused me for a second because I realized that I realized I didn't know that I had a bias like that it was the particular aesthetic of that white couple that made me nervous that child did not belong to them. And I know there's this conversation in the news where a lot of times it's white people walking up to black people who have biracial children and or just a white child, like say they're caring for a white child or a white assumed child, and they get harassed for that. And in my case, I was thinking the reverse of that news story, right? And yeah, I just got nervous for that little girl all of a sudden, and then I told myself to mind my business because the girl was there playing with her little phone thing, and she was responding to the people. So that's when the mind your business kicked in. But that in that moment, I realized something about myself, that bias for me, their aesthetic did not compute.
I got you, Charmaine. Now, two things. We wouldn't have computed for me either.
Mm,
And there's a couple reasons why. And I think, first of all, I about biases. I think we should just lead with this. Everybody has biases, and I believe that we're all
mhm.
always going to have biases. I don't think you can
Right, yeah.
rid the human psyche of biases. I just don't.
You
So
can
I
be
try to,
woke and try, but stuff
yes,
just pops up and bites you sometimes and you don't even realize.
absolutely. You can be woke and try. And I think that at times when it's problematic or potentially problematic, or somebody lets you know it's problematic, it's always good to ruthlessly interrogate and investigate our biases and decide whether we want to do something about them or we can just keep them there. So for instance, if I'd been with you or if I'd seen what you saw in the airport, a couple of things, I would have reacted exactly as you reacted.
Mm,
The first reaction would have been, okay, wait, is she supposed to be with them? And
mhm,
then, and this is an interesting bias, but one that you responded to, and I would have responded to in exactly the same way. If her hair had been laid,
mhm.
I'd have been like, oh, she kidnapped. Now
Yeah.
that could be completely incorrect, obviously. But since her
Sure,
hair was, and this is a stereotype, this is a bias, but it is so rooted in truth and still to this day so common
sure.
that if it's something you're aware of, and of course as mixed black folks we're hyper dialed into it 100% of the time.
Right.
Since her hair was, as you describe, and I can picture, a mess, meaning it was clearly not being cared for by a black person.
That's and yes, that is yeah, that is what I meant, is that it looked like it had been brushed with what would not be the proper brush versus even combed. It was kinda pulled back in like a little, tiny ponytail, curly ponytail, but with the bangs or the parts that were, like, hanging, those were curls that had been, like, pulled out so that you could tell her hair was meant to be curly, and if it had just been, properly cared for, she would've looked put together, but in this case, she looked like, and there goes that stereotype that we say is stereotype for a reason or grounded in truth, she looked like she had a white parent who was
Taking care of her
responsible for
hair.
her hair, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's so weird. So that's the thing that I think paused me, is that her having the hair like that made me go, "Oh, they must be related," which, like, wow. Wow. Like, I can't believe that that's what's calmed me down. Like, actually, that kinda disturbs me now that I'm saying it out loud,
I
that
don't think
that's
it should
what calmed
disturb
me
you. But
down.
wait, no, wait, wait. I don't think. Okay, it can disturb you if you want, but I don't vote that it disturb you for a couple of reasons. Again, and for I don't know who's listening. So for those who don't know, this is a really prevalent reality
Mhm.
with a lot of mixed black children
Children, yeah.
whose mothers or fathers or caregivers aren't black, and some who are black, actually. I'm in a bunch of groups of parents of mixed kids that are
Mhm.
focused on hair just to lurk and learn. Every once in a while, I say a little something, something. And I got
Mhm.
to tell you, there's pockets of these parents that are really, really devoted. Like they go all out. They got
Mhm.
kids with hair textures like mine. They're laying the kids. I'm like, oh my
Yeah.
Lord. Okay. So, but so this is a thing. And I want to say that because it did not originate with you, Charmaine.
Yeah,
it
sure. It
it
comes from
doesn't mean
somewhere,
there's
right?
anything wrong with you. It's again a stereotype so prevalent and popular that I would have reacted 1000% exactly as you did. It doesn't mean that you're correct in your assumptions. It just means it tracks with something that's already inside of you. So you go like it lines up,
Mhm,
you know,
mhm. Yeah.
it lines up like a slot machine almost.
Yeah, yeah, it was like boxes being checked. It's like, okay, obviously, yeah, that means something,
She
but
taking
I
care of her hair with it,
yeah.
another thing I just want to say, and I don't want to linger on this, but another reason I would have responded like you did, and that I think it was good that you did, is you were in an airport,
Mhm.
and in the last few years we have become far, far, far more aware of
Right.
the realities of human trafficking
Mhm.
and how insanely prevalent human trafficking is,
Mhm.
and that the people doing the trafficking don't always look like what we would expect them to look
Right.
like. Okay. Like I was hyper, pre-pandemic, I took public transportation a lot, and I'm just was always tuned in. I'm in Atlanta, always tuned in. So and a couple times things seemed off, and I reached out to authorities or somebody I thought could help. Just again, hyper vigilant,
Mhm.
hyper aware, because again, if you know any of the details of human trafficking, it's terrifying. It's absolutely terrifying. So that's another reason in an airport, and you're in a
Mhm.
major city.
Mhm.
I'm in
Yeah.
a major city. I'm in what's tagged the world's second busiest airport,
Mm.
Atlanta. So that makes you, and Atlanta is one of the biggest trafficking cities.
Yeah, that's right. I was thinking that.
So, but so is New York. So is LA. So,
Yeah.
so I think our consciousness has been raised about trafficking in general
Mhm.
and what it might look like. There's still, I don't think for most
Right.
of us, we don't
Yeah,
really
because some of it's,
know.
like, audacious and right in your face, and you might still miss it, right? A lot of the
Yeah.
cases of stories I've heard where a person manages to get a note to a stewardess or something like that, um, flight attendant, would, like, they're out in public, they look like they're together,
Yeah.
except that, at some point, the girl can get a note to somebody, right? In this
Yes.
case, like I said, she's a child and, I'm not great with ages, but I was gauging it around 8 to 9 years old, possibly, just based off of height, and how young she looked. She was playing a little game and she was acknowledging the woman when the woman was talking to her and stuff like that, but, I just, like, I can't I like, it just yeah, that's just how I felt in that moment, and I got nervous about it, um, and it was it's weird, like, what the weird thing about some biases that jump up and bite you is, like, the physical reaction to a moment that you have, and that's what it was, is, like, I saw them, I had no time to think, I saw them and my body got hot. And, so it really wasn't even like I felt like I looked at them enough to even gauge all the information. But it like my body got hot really quick and I just thought as I was walking to the bathroom, I was like, "Wow, I cannot believe how fast I went through that, like, emotional roller coaster for this child that is a stranger to me," right? Um, because I know how it happens on the reverse side, I know that it happens to Black parents of light skinned and or biracial children or white assumed children or white appearing children, and how they're harassed and things like that. And so this was a different side of that, but it was one that and I feel like I wouldn't have had that same reaction if they were like a hipster looking couple, because I would have assumed right away that it was so trendy for them to adopt a brown child that I think if they were like straight up hipster looking types, um, or what I would describe in with a complete bias as well as I'm saying it, like a Brooklyn hipster white. If I saw them with a black child, I'd be like, that tracks. Like
Right.
that's a thing right now that there are people that adopt outside of their race and ethnicity and stuff like that. And so that's what I thought. Like I after when like I'm evaluating it throughout the day, I was just like, I bet you that wouldn't have even like, I would have just noted, "Oh, there goes another one of those couples that adopt outside," like, I think I wouldn't have stopped it, but I think it was because these people looked, like, rural or and country like, I was like, "What are you doing with that black baby?" Like, that was the first thing that popped in my head. Um, so yeah, that was my moment of this did not compute for me. And and it made me aware of a bias I did not know that I had.
Yes. And a bias, I'm not sure you need to get rid of. That's my vote.
I mean,
That's my
fair,
personal.
like, I
Well,
mean
I mean, I'm hyper vigilant about children in general and children of color in
mhm,
particular, and then a child who might be mixed, extra particular. And again,
sure,
I haven't ever interrogated myself. I just am like, well, that's just who I am. It doesn't mean I'm going to jump up and interfere or call the law. It, but it means I'm going to be watching and clocking if I'm in a
sure,
situation.
yeah,
But I also want to say, I wonder how much of that is just normal and normal human nature. And then those things are fed for better or for worse. And again, bias all over the place. by the information we're fed, by the information
Mhm.
we're given, we intake. Here we are in the information world. So it might have been a post, it might have been a news report you saw
Well,
anywhere,
yeah. I mean, I
right?
do listen to a few podcasts about trafficking or true crime in general, but like Missing Black Girl podcasts, and then the Missing Black Girl Foundation's is it HBO documentary? I think
Yes, I
it's
think
on
so.
HBO.
No, that I got.
Um, like those are on my mind. And it actually, even though this is completely unrelated, but it sparked a feeling that was not unsimilar to. I don't know if I've ever told you this story, but I do you remember Elizabeth Smart, the
Yes.
Mormon? Okay. I
Yes.
saw my mother-in-law and I saw her in San Diego with the couple that kidnapped her. We did not know at the time we saw her until 2 days later when they finally caught them. So we were visiting my sister-in-law, and we were doing I forget if it was the Christmas trip or a birthday trip. So I don't remember what time of year it was, but whatever reason, we were all at the mall as a family. And across we were on the second floor, and across the way, like through the gap and across the way, we see this these three white people wearing those white robes, and the man had like the turban thing. So obviously standing out, like sticking out like a sore thumb, right? And he was quite tall, and sunken eyes and stuff like that. And I remember my mother-in-law, who is a white woman, looks over at me and she goes, "That man is really creepy. Like, plus, why is he in that robe?" Like, so clearly going, you don't normally see white people in robes like this. Like, even for her, that stood out, right? And I was like, oh yeah, he is really creepy. And then the way that the younger girl was like huddled into and turned into the older woman, and
Mm.
they were wearing white robes, and even their I forget how much of their hair was covered, but I think you could tell that the mother was, or the woman was, brunettish, and the child, or the younger person, the younger woman, was blondish. And I remember my mother-in-law making a note about the girl, about like, she doesn't look comfortable. And
Mm.
then she said, "Should we do something?" And I remember going, I don't know. Do you want to try to find security?" And ultimately, we didn't end up doing anything. So I don't remember what led us, because now this is years and years, right? Probably almost 20 years now. So we it was just something that she and I shared. My mother-in-law and I were the only two that talked about it. And then 2 days later, when we were back home from San Diego from that trip, it was all over the news. And so I go to my uh, actually, were we married? I'm not sure if we were married at the time, but I went to my mother-in-law's house, and she's like, "That was them. That was them." And so we both felt like tremendous guilt, that like we had the instinct, right? We saw that there was something that felt wrong about this threesome of people that we saw, but we didn't do anything. And part of that is that human thing of just like, yeah, mind your business. And part of it is thinking like, who are you to think other people are doing
Mm.
something
Mm.
bad, right? Like, I will say that, at least for me. I won't speak for my mother-in-law, but I do remember us having conversations about like, we kind of went between like guilt and just like, well, at least they got caught, um, and stuff. And so now I feel like I have this weird tie to this girl's story. So even as she comes out and does other news things as a woman now, I'll look at her and I'm like, man, I can't believe I saw her, and I didn't know to do anything. So I think I always probably have that also in the back of my head too.
Yeah,
And
I mean,
then
that whole
yet,
story. My
yeah, and
God, that makes the airport really make sense. I didn't know that
yeah,
story.
so that is something, and I actually didn't even think about it really until we started talking, when I first jumped on with you today, where I was like, "Oh yeah, what about the Elizabeth Smart thing?" So then
Mm.
that's another interesting part too. It's like, here's a one where I know I saw the bad people, right? With an innocent girl that needed to be saved. And I obviously I knew after the fact, but I didn't do anything, and I felt some guilt about that pops up every now and then. I think about it. I'm like, man, I can't believe I saw that person. And then yet here I was in the airport with a situation that made me feel very similar.
I mean,
And
but
I
you
didn't
know
do
what?
anything
That's
again, you know?
well. Wait a minute. Well, now that you've told us all your backstory, I mean, there is no way you can beat yourself up for, and I'm not even sure based on your backstory that it's a bias anymore. I mean, yes, it's a bias, but that it's not
There's
the bad
something feeding the
bias. But I mean,
idea that
you have legitimate backstory reason
yeah.
to have responded that way. You have an actual lived experience, and because you found out a few, shortly thereafter, you're living with some guilt and some questioning of yourself and what would I do. But so the whole that did not compute. So first of all, that's even more powerful. Of course you would have done that.
I guess
But I
that
would have done
also
that
is
in
that
the
that did
airport
not
too.
compute because it was like a white man in a robe with a turban and,
Right.
like things like that. And
Looking
yeah,
not
like,
not not normal for the environment, right?
and
Like you said,
living in the States, you're not accustomed to, let's say, even because they were in sort of like, the women were in sort of like a white, kind of robe situation that was semi like a hijab. It wasn't quite the same tuck, but,
right.
but living in the United States, we're not accustomed to seeing white Muslims in full garb. So even that didn't code as, hey, maybe they're just white Muslims.
Right.
Like if I was in Germany or England or other parts of Europe, I might have seen that and thought, oh, that's what white Muslims look like. You know what I'm saying? But we're just
Yes.
not as accustomed to seeing that here. And in fact, I've only ever seen um like fully covered, well, not face exposed, but fully covered white Muslims in England. Like that's the only place that I've ever seen them. So, in my personal experience. So yeah, it didn't pop up for me for them necessarily. It just popped up as weird. In
Yeah.
this case, I think it was the same thing. This just pops up for me as weird, and
Mhm.
it made me feel a kind of way for a second. And then the other side kicked in of, well, what are you gonna do? Like, even if I did go walk over to a security, which now that I'm sitting here, like, I don't recall if I saw anybody that was in security, but even if I was saying like, "Hey, do you wanna check on that?" I think that is the next step of being concerned about the little girl again, right? What are they gonna do to that little girl?
Mhm. Actually, yes. And part of it's, I guess, I would also call instinct. So all those things, right? Under the heading of when you see something that doesn't compute, that seems dissonant, that doesn't seem to fit in to the environment and or what you, whoever you are accustomed to seeing. But can we look at how that applies now not to human trafficking and kidnapping so much and torture, but with mixedness, mixed families, mixed
Mhm.
people, when we've been on the receiving end of it and when we've been on the giving end
Yeah.
of
Yeah, there's a bunch of things. I could pull a bunch of them. 'em. I'm sure you can too. Do
it.
you have
Absolutely.
what's one that you have, since I shared my story, a
That
story
did not
already?
compute. Well, I don't compute for a lot of people. So I'm super racially ambiguous. I describe myself as super racially ambiguous looking. And
Mhm.
I describe myself that way based on 60 plus years of experience with other people's perceptions and views of me.
Right.
Okay, that doesn't come from me innately, but I grew up knowing I was light skinned and had a certain kind of hair and all that, and I was
Yeah.
mixed. But that I am that in the world in general, with variations based on different places and contexts, I am super racially ambiguous looking. I am like many mixed people, and not all mixed people, and not only mixed people, but
Mhm.
like many mixed people. I'm like a walking ink blot test, right?
Yeah.
And what that means is I very rarely have any idea how a person is going to read me. That's what I call it, reading me. How they're
Mhm.
going to read me, right? I've spanned many continents. The perceptions of me
Yeah.
span many continents in my lifetime. There are some people who read me as white. Most people don't, especially as the saying has gone my whole life, starting with my mother, when you start talking. But
Yeah, yeah,
there,
that one happens to me
that's
a lot
been,
too.
yeah, lots of stories. She's white, but no, she's black. Okay. There are people who read me as black, but rarely just black, but some who do. And then for the most part, if I'm not sure, I often, especially on the East Coast, well, both coasts, am read as some kind of Latin. Is that how we're saying now? Latine?
Latine, yeah.
Latine. Um, depending, especially by Latina folks. And then recently, I've been living in Atlanta for the last decade, and this is, you and I've talked about this, and I do understand it, but I don't really understand it, especially when people are talking to me face to face and they get insistent about it. But recently, I'm read a lot as Asian.
That baffles me. Like, I mean, as a mixed Asian, that baffles me that
And
you
they're
get
not
that.
even talking mixed Asian. Now, granted, no Asian people have read me as Asian,
Right.
unlike Latina people. Okay.
Sure.
But what's interesting, and this is Black people, white people, different genders, different generations, and a couple Latina people who I was like, don't you think I'm what you are? Like, I'm
Mhm.
so used to them thinking I'm whatever they are.
Right,
And
yeah.
they're like, aren't you? And then they're like, and then we specific sometimes. Sometimes it's like, you look Korean.
I
I'm
can't
like,
believe it.
you do? Okay. Or you look Chinese. I'm not. Now, TaRessa, grew up with a lot of Asian Americans, but I cannot look at an Asian person
Hmm.
and clock what kind of Asian they are accurately based on their appearance, except sometimes Filipinos.
Yeah, I would
Sometimes.
say for
But the
most
rest, if you
people,
want
that
me
would
to
be
look, if you line up Korean, Vietnamese, Japanese, Chinese,
yeah.
et cetera, and want me to, I'm not even going to try.
Yeah.
I might be like, let me see their name. But that doesn't always tell you either,
That
right?
doesn't always, yeah,
That doesn't
you
always tell you either.
sometimes.
When I was growing up, that's what the Asian kids taught us. This is that's a Chinese name. That's a so in a we had a general template
And
to
that's a
it.
way better way of going about it than what a lot of people try to do in the West, which is eye shape. And while us as like I'll say as East Asians, it's easier for me to clock East Asians based off of eye shape, based off of my upbringing. But even then, I can be wrong because there is intermixing and all that kind of stuff too. Is far
Yeah,
back in our DNA, so it's not always accurate, and it's definitely something you don't want outsiders doing. Like it's not great. It's not great.
it's not great. So I tell people, look, I
You tell
don't.
me.
I'm not even trying to. I'm gonna ask you because I'm not trying to ask. So that did not compute. So the thing that's interesting is with the many, many things that people think I am, they also think my brother, his kids, and my kids are we're all ambiguous looking, all light skin.
Mhm.
Um, is the fact that very rarely does anybody guess the things that I actually am. And most of the time they guess things that, as far as I know, I don't have anywhere in my DNA.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's what's so strange about
That's what's
people.
so strange about it. And and then the people who argue with you, you do
Yeah.
tell them, well, and like you, and we just met in the last couple of years, but like I've been known, like a lot of mixed people, I've been known to give them I don't do percentages and fractions, and I haven't had my DNA run, so I don't know
Mhm.
numbers, but I'll be like, okay, we've got Black, Jewish, Native American, da, 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 and as
Yeah.
much detail, because I just want them to, okay, but nobody looks at me and goes, two people have in my whole life looked at me and said, you're Black and Jewish.
Really? Were they other Black Jewish people?
No.
Oh, really? Interesting.
But when I was a child, and this is a vague memory, but it happened in probably elementary school, and I think it was like a janitorial worker, sanitation worker, and I think maybe that person was Puerto Rican, but
Mm.
that part's a vague memory, and the other person is famous. So if you're familiar, I'm sure she won't mind me telling this story. If you're familiar with Bobbi Brown Cosmetics, not the
Mhm.
singer, the
The
cosmetic company.
cosmetics. Mhm.
So we lived in the same town, but in Montclair, New Jersey. But I hadn't met her yet, and she won an award at a big show. I was working for the local newspaper, and I interviewed her for that she had won an award. And at the end of the interview, this is Bobbi Brown. We all know Bobbi Brown Cosmetics.
Mhm.
There are many Black people. Her cosmetics are often included in roundups of best cosmetics for Black women in
Right.
Essence and places like
For
that.
the longest, she was like the only one that you could even name.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And so she's very cool Jewish woman. um but anyway, I interviewed her and it was a great interview, and then at the end, again, she's a famous person, she looks at me, she goes, so what are you? And I was like, guess. And she takes a second when I tell y'all a second, okay, and she goes, oh, you're Black and Jewish. And then she said bluish, and that was the first time I'd heard
Oh, that's
anybody
the
say
first time
bluish.
you heard it? Okay.
And I thought, I said, oh, that's cute. When I was walking away, I thought, how appropriate for someone I don't know how come she knew. I
Mhm.
never asked her. When we became friends later, hung out at her house, all that. But I never asked her how she knew. But then I thought, how appropriate for someone who comes up with cosmetic names to say bluish. Like
Yeah.
that, like
The
it's a
first time
statement
I
of
heard
blush.
bluish was from a comedian, I don't think it was Andre, maybe it was him. Maybe it was when he was really young. What's that guy's name? He's bluish, and he says he describes
Oh,
himself
okay.
as, he said, well, when I first saw him, he was a young comic, and he described himself as looking like, a character that Jim Henson made. Because, like, he just like, nobody could figure out what he was or whatever,
Yep,
and so he
yep,
said, "I'm
yep.
bluish, I'm black and Jewish," and that was the first time I ever heard that, and then the next time I heard it was you. It's so weird, like, I thought that would've taken on, but I
Yeah.
you're the only other person I ever heard describe
But
yourself as
that's where I
that.
got it from. So that's the official story, everybody.
That's
But
funny.
Gabby Brown, cosmetics mogul, and a wonderful and just a wonderful, cool, fun person. Anyway, um, but that was, but so I'm way more startled when people guess correctly because this happens so rarely. So I don't compute
Yeah.
for a lot of people, but with that, and then what that turns to is there are some people who dig in, and despite me sharing my actual background with them, they dig in and they decide that the thing that they have already assumed me to be is correct and that I'm wrong.
Right.
That creates
That's
a
my favorite.
form of dissonance that's hard to even fathom, let alone articulate and share publicly.
'Cause why do they have a dog in that fight? Like, why
Right.
well, first of all, what's our motivation? And I've talked about this on the show a bunch of times, and even and specifically with the Dominicans are the most like,
Oh,
passionate about me not being correct.
and for
Like,
me, it's
the I
Puerto
will
Ricans. For me, it's Puerto
for
Ricans.
you, it's Puerto Rican.
You got Dominicans, I got Puerto Ricans.
With the Dominicans, I've had Dominicans, like, they're in my face and they got their hands and they're just like, "You need to have Dominican pride, and why are you denying yourself?" and blah, 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 and, like, it feels like it's coming from love even though it's, like, mad aggressive, where it's just like, "You look like me, why don't you wanna be a part of me?" Like, I
How
appreciate it
dare
because
you? It's
yeah,
got a
how
how
dare
dare
you?
you to it.
Yeah. And then but on the flip of that, like, never one time in my entire life has someone thought I was Japanese. Not a single time. And if I tell Japanese, it's usually met with, "That's funny that you think you're Japanese," or, "That's cute that you think you're Japanese." It's not really it doesn't translate quite the way it would in English, but, like, it's mostly like, because they're a homogenous,
Hmm.
nation, their identity is national. It's not ethnic
Right,
necessarily.
right,
So, because I'm not born in Japan, I'm obviously not Japanese. But also an extension of that, just to give people context that don't know, my grandmother who left Japan in the late 50s is no longer Japanese to them either
right,
because she left. And especially now that she's lived here for as long as she's lived, if she were to go back to Japan now, she wouldn't be viewed as a Japanese person. She'd be viewed as an American.
understood.
Which to me, I hear and I see a Japanese woman, but they hear and see an American. Um so for them, like so even for Japanese who I meet, I'm not necessarily accepted. Mixed Japanese or American born mixed Japanese is where I get a little bit of community, but that's very new. That's just since I've been doing the show and since I've been meeting people in that thing. Usually if someone thinks I'm Asian, and Asians will do this, will say like, "You sure you're not Filipino?"
Yep, yep.
And
I
then
would definitely thought you were
yeah, and that's the one I get, and that's because why? Because the Philippines were colonized by fucking everybody, and because they have early origins with African,
and they're
that on them too. So,
yes,
like, I get it. Like, I get why someone would code me as I really honestly understand why someone would code me as either Filipino or Dominican because,
yes.
I'm yellow brown, but I have black features. I
Mhm,
understand it.
mhm, mhm.
But and even like Filipinos, and I've told this story on the show too, where like this Filipino lady saw me in a Costco and asked me if I had a boyfriend, and I said I did, and she's like, "Oh no, dump him. You don't need him. I have a boy for you. He's great. Da da da." And then she was like, "I'll bring you lumpia." She was promising me all this
But girl,
food and
I
stuff
would
like
have
that.
taken the lumpia before I
You know
told
what
you
I'm
the truth.
saying? And then and then when I ended up revealing that I wasn't Filipino, and it wasn't like I told her I was Filipino, she assumed.
I
But
got
then she said something and I was like, "Oh no, I'm not Filipino." And she's like, "What?" And I told her I'm like, "I'm black and Japanese." And she's like, "Oh no, I thought you were a nice girl." And I remember being like so hurt from that cuz like me not being Filipino is not what would make me a nice or not nice girl. You know?
oh my God.
So, and I was like just ready to like, I mean, take that tray of lumpia and run away and be like, thanks,
Yeah,
but yeah,
I
like,
would definitely taking the loopy at that point. But
so that
anyway,
one hurt because like I didn't
yes,
tell her I was Filipino. She assumed.
she
She didn't know
assumed
shit about me, but she
nothing.
decided I was the right woman for her son.
Baby, you was about to be up in the family.
I was gonna have all the discounts and
You,
everything,
yes, you
but
was gonna have the babies. You was gonna
I
do
was gonna have all the
everything.
babies, but as soon as she found out I wasn't Filipino, I was no longer good enough for her son, and so which is funny because I remember saying, "What? I can't marry him now?" Like as if not even like I, it was just like, it's like when someone tries to take something away from you, just like, wait a second, this is my husband. How you gonna not let me take my husband now just because I'm not?
Well,
But
it was also that you were that she had elevated you,
mhm.
and then she fired you.
I got
She
I got
demoted
promoted and
your
fired in the
value
same
as
conversation.
she demoted your value as a human
Yeah.
based on that
Right.
blackness.
Yes.
Based on that black. Let's be real
Yeah.
clear.
So it was, "Oh, I thought you were a nice girl," and mind you, like, that was probably 2002, 2003, like,
You still hurt. You
it
still
is
hurt.
very much it's not a memory that has faded even a
No,
little bit.
no, that's
So,
not
like,
that
there's
great.
the mixed bag of someone who thinks I'm like them and then are disappointed to find out what I actually am. And then there's the ones that are saying, "No, you're wrong. You're just wrong." So Dominicans are the ones who do this. The Dominicans are like, "No, you're wrong. You are Dominican. Like calm the fuck down. Like accept it." With Filipinos, it's like once they find out, they're like, "Oh, okay, that's fine. We're good." Like
You have
that's
been
the thing.
discarded from the
You know,
Filipino pile. You
yeah, but, like, even Japanese don't like, I'm never like, "Oh, yeah, you're obviously a black and Japanese," like, that never happens. Um,
mm,
and even right now, like, I have a Japanese tutor who's from Japan and everything, and she accepts me. She also laughs a lot because I have a very traditional Japanese perspective, which I didn't know this. She was the one who told me, because my grandmother comes from her family was a samurai class before
mm,
my grandma came here, right? Like, so the era of the samurai ended during the same time the Civil War here was happening. So my grandmother's grandmother would have been like the last one after or the first one after the samurai period, right? Like, or at least she would still probably have held on to some of those um traits and things like that. But by the time my grandmother is born, we're, a good amount of time, 60, 80 years away from that era and stuff like that. So my grandmother actually still does, and I didn't know this, have very traditional like samurai class mentality,
mm.
which I was raised in. And so when I talk to my tutor who is not from a samurai class, she laughs because she's like, it's so funny that you are like American born and you're mixed race and you're way more traditional than I am. And I'm born here and I'm in this like, basically she's in these Japanese streets and she is like, you are so like, it's almost like being told you're like too uptight in your Japaneseness. It,
I love that
it's so funny.
though.
So like it was weird to find that out. And I'm so glad to have this interaction with my tutor. One, because we get along so well and I, like we're friends. We're gonna be friends. Like that's just what's happening. But the perspectives that she gives me and what she's teaching me about even my biases about what it means to be Japanese has started to shift because of what I'm learning from her. And then she's learning a lot from me. And then she asks all these questions about like race and relations in America and stuff like that. So like we have a great thing, but she's the first time where I've ever really felt accepted by a Japanese
Mm,
person just off the basis of what I am. She acknowledges my traditional Japaneseness, which again I didn't know I had.
I love
Um,
that. I love that.
and so yeah, it's really fun. So it's funny because um my Japanese does not compute for her, not because I'm mixed, but because my grandmother is samurai or from samurai class. So
See?
that's another does not compute because
Yeah.
like I'm almost too Japanese.
You're hyper Japanese and didn't know it because
And I didn't know.
your
Yeah.
grandmother's been your sole point of reference.
Yeah, and so I didn't
Wow.
realize, like, how much of even my Japaneseness was like, I understand that, like, obviously, this is the woman I get it from, but I just assumed this her way is the way. You know what I'm saying? And so, like, to learn that from someone who doesn't come from that class of people, and even though people aren't walking around, like, sizing you up based off of whether or not you descend from the samurai or anything like that, in Japan now, when it happens, it's just a surprise. Like, for her, she's like, "You don't encounter" even people who have, like, my last name, my Japanese last name, um, wouldn't necessarily it wouldn't make you think right away, "Oh, they must still hold very traditional Japanese values." You know what I'm saying? Like, they wouldn't it wouldn't necessarily think that, and yet here I am, doot, 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 like this little, hafu American,
You're
um
repping the ancestors.
yeah, so, like, for me,
You're
it's
repping the ancestors.
yeah, so it's so funny to have that experience, and, oh, I'm so grateful for it too, because I don't think I would have had it if I hadn't not just met a person, but, like, we bonded really quickly, we liked each other really quickly, so I'm getting this opportunity now to understand my Japaneseness at a different level from someone who has a different Japanese experience than my family, so it's been pretty cool. That's
That's
a
a
that
gift.
that's a
That's a
cute
gift.
it doesn't compute. Um
Yeah, but no, that's a cute one. So I have another one. So in Black African American spaces,
Mhm,
and I thought of it when you said class. So in African American spaces, when people are sizing me up, right? Because we all
mhm,
size each other up, and in an African American context, class and color features, hair texture, not always, but there are very, 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 very common presumptions and assumptions made.
mhm,
So what I learned it really after I moved to Atlanta many years ago and worked at an HBCU
mhm,
and was immersed all of a sudden coming from Seattle, Washington. I was all of a sudden immersed in what was in the Black Mecca in blackness, and so I learned many. I've always been immersed in as much blackness as I could, but I was now in a black environment, and this was before Atlanta was diverse, before the '96 Olympics, and so
mhm,
so two things happened. It was the first place I'd been outside my immediate neighborhood in my life, and I was an adult by then in my 30s, that I was not racially ambiguous looking. In old Atlanta, again, pre-1996, which was still very black white,
mhm,
there were very few Asian people, there were very few Latine people. There were black people and there were white people.
mhm.
And this is the 1980s. And I wasn't racially ambiguous looking.
You were just black.
I was just black.
Yeah.
I was just black. I wasn't even like, what are you? Are you mixed?
Yeah.
I was just another red bone, light
Yeah.
skinned black girl. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah.
That
Yeah.
was it. It was very liberating. So I was like, okay, all right, cool. Now in the new Atlanta that is diverse and has more folk from different parts of the world, I am once again ambiguous looking.
Mhm,
Oh, well, anyway, but in African American spaces, when I pop in and whatever I'm doing, simply because I'm light skinned and my features and my hair texture or textures, I am assumed to be very, very bourgeois upper class.
yeah.
That
That I know that assumption that happens. I've seen
yeah,
it.
I mean, that is just an immediate assumption.
Mhm.
And it's a hard assumption, like it's not sometimes.
Yeah.
And the irony of it is that technically, I mean, I grew up with my Jewish mother, black dad, but they were divorced. Is that technically my mother and my brother and I, we were working class poor,
Mhm,
and we grew up in a nice neighborhood, but it was still the hood. And there
mhm,
were elements of the hood that somebody passing by casually wouldn't see, but it had all the elements of a hood.
mhm.
Okay. And as I tell people, I grew up hood and I grew up hard, and I will tell black people that, and they'll be looking at me and they'll be like, it's just
Not with
it
your light
that
skin, yeah.
cannot be possible. That cannot
Yeah.
be possible. So my real light. That's one reason I wrote the memoir Swirl Girl, Coming of Race in the USA, is because there's such a dissonance. And Black folks just wouldn't buy it because they hadn't grown up with me. They didn't, especially they didn't know Seattle and how, yes, you could be in the hood and still see beautiful mountains and lakes and
Yeah.
all that green, but it's still
Yeah,
there.
that's true. That's a weird.
There's
Yeah.
these dichotomies and this dissonance, but it's an interesting thing because in Black spaces, I'm given, I have an access pass. You know, not that the brown paper bag test of yours is technically in place, but if it's a place where there's a lot of folk of that ilk,
Mm-hmm.
I can walk in the door. I'm not going to get gate checked at the door.
Yeah.
Just because of what I look like. I'm fully aware of that. But again, it's real interesting because I think all of us, and I think this is what you're experiencing with your Japanese tutor, all of us, every human, I believe, longs to be acknowledged and affirmed and accepted for who they really are,
Mm-hmm.
for their actual selves,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And that's every human. That's not unique to any group. And I think that's just, again, a human nature. And you know, so when people, I don't get upset at all the different ways, the many different ways that people
Mm-hmm.
read me. But then what happens is they're often interacting with the fantasy in their head, even though you're there trying to interact. So you have your Dominican story, you're Dominican, your experience with Dominican folk, and mine with Puerto Ricans is identical.
Yeah.
So what's interesting is I worked for a while when I lived in Southern New Jersey in Camden at a charter school run by a brilliant Puerto Rican woman. I don't know if it's still there. And it was housed on the campus at Rutgers, Camden, New Jersey. And most of the people who worked in the office, I got a job to help her do some communications things, were Puerto Rican. And it was interesting for all of us because it was a young man who was like my assistant. He was in law school, Orlando. He looked more like me than my children do.
That's funny.
Like we look exactly alike.
Yeah, I've definitely looked like other people's relatives before too.
But I mean, I had my own children, and I look at Orlando, and he'd look at me, and I was like,
Like, who are they?
"Dang, like my kids," you know. Anyway, so what was interesting, I worked there for several months, was all the time. Now I would come in, and I wasn't upset that they thought I was Puerto Rican, but I was like, I'm not Puerto Rican. They did some things that were interesting, like hold staff meetings and just switch to all Spanish for 15 minutes. I'd be like, excuse me, isn't this illegal? Wait, isn't this illegal? Are there laws against anyway? I'm just sitting there like, because I can understand enough Spanish to glean
Yeah.
the gist, you know. So I'm just kind of like, why would y'all do that? But anyway, but what was interesting was I kept having, especially to this young man, Orlando, he could not let it go. It was almost every day or every other day.
That's so
Are you?
funny.
And a lot of the other people too, though, women my age, if you were older, are you sure you're not Puerto Rican? Like they just, I think I was keeping them up at night. Because they would come in, and they'd be like, "Are you sure?" Like,
are you sure? Yeah.
clearly, girlfriend. And then it doesn't help that my name TaRessa easily goes into a Spanish lingua.
Right. Yeah.
That doesn't help. It's not. My name is not Aisha, Keisha.
And that's what they would expect it
So,
would have been. Yeah.
that doesn't help either. TaRessa, are you sure? Are you like, maybe, you just don't really understand what you are,
Yeah.
which, that chips away.
That's a weird one too, because it's kind of like
Are you serious?
condescending, like it's like, oh, you don't get it. Like you don't get it. And I don't think they always mean it that way, but like people just get so dug into what
They
you're
get so dug
supposed to
in,
look
girl.
like.
And then you're like, okay. And so what I would do, and this is the part I need someone who is Puerto Rican to help me with this, even though this was, gosh, 20 years ago. I would love for someone to just help me with this. I said to them, okay, let me explain why we look so much alike.
Yeah.
But I had to have this conversation more than once. So we go all the way to Senegal, to Gorée Island and places like that, where the ships are lined up. And our ancestors are herded and loaded and, all the trauma of the middle transatlantic slave trade, mid-Atlantic passage, all that. I said, and, your ancestors ship
Yeah.
went this way. My
My
ancestors,
ancestors went
there
this
was most of the people just went to Brazil. We now
but
know.
they all came from
But
roughly the
I
same
said, we
area.
are probably, yeah. I said, if you ran back then, we didn't even have DNA testing like we
Yeah.
do now. This is 20 years ago. I said, but if you ran our DNA, we're cousins. I like the way
Yeah.
you call everybody cousins.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no doubt that if we go back far enough, there is a potential for an ancestor or two swimming through our DNA. I said, but the reason we look alike is diasporically, you had West African enslaved people
Mhm.
raped by European colonialists and or enslavers.
Mhm.
And then in most places, there were also indigenous,
Indigenous people.
Native American, Amerindian, Taino, whatever we're calling them,
Mhm.
folks whose stuff got in there
So
too.
there's ancestry is shared way back too, so that's
Right.
why we
But
all
the
kinda
thing
look alike.
was, they didn't, when I would, go out of my way to tell my beautiful ship story, they would just look at me like I was crazy. So I was
Yeah.
trying to figure out, have they never heard that? Do they not understand that they too are part of this diaspora and we're
Yeah.
all really cousins? Or
That's something I'm learning more now during the show than ever before. I did not realize, Latin America s had such a denial of the Black ancestry necessarily,
yeah.
until I started talking to people on the show who that was their experience,
Mm.
and then, especially with the Brazilian people that I've spoken to,
Oh yeah.
like, because they have I forget the number, but it's like 35 or 50 or something like that categories of ethnicity and race breakdown
In between
within
white and black.
in between white and black,
In between
there
white
is
and
a
black.
number of different categories that some of them distinguish mixedness and some of them don't necessarily, but are a product of mixedness, obviously. And until I started talking to people on the show, I didn't understand why South American people were so and Caribbean, I guess too, because I didn't understand that either. We're so hardcore into no, we are actually different things. And I was like, well, the black people came here from the same place. So you can
Mhm.
start there. Um, the same colonizers that well, I mean, I know that the colonizers are slightly different. You have more Spanish and Portuguese down there and you have more Anglo up here, but there's a like a lot, there's like a overlap between,
Yes.
that, and so that's why we do tend to look so much alike. Um,
Exactly.
I did actually have to, and we'll kind of wrap up on this. I did have to explain to somebody why I call my listeners and my guests cousins, and a combination of things. I think because with not just with mixed folks, but especially people in the African diaspora. Um, we come from people that were very tribal and family oriented and things like that.
Mhm.
Not to say that there weren't like warring tribes and stuff like that. Of course, there were people who didn't get along, but in general, especially let's just break it down even further to the Bantu people, which is what a lot of us who from West Africa share. They originate in Kenya, they work their way down into South Africa, and they work their way up the western coast, and that's why so many of us have ancestry from so
Mm.
many different places, right? Until they settle and become the new thing that they end up being. Um, when we got picked up on those ships and when they brought us and spread us all throughout this Western hemisphere, um, we were separated from our actual family.
Yes.
Sometimes we were bred together to make new people that were taken away from us too. So our greeting of each other as family, especially as black people, our greeting of each other as family, I think is not just that we have a shared oppressive history. I think it's also that we literally don't know if we're not related. That it's
Yes.
more of a possibility that any of us among the African diaspora are related than, any random other ethnic group anywhere else, right? They took
Mm.
us away, they separated us. They
Mm.
constantly, they would flip back on each other and separate people even further so that by the time emancipation happens and people are putting those ads in the paper, have you ever seen my daughter? She would have gone by this name at this time, that kind of stuff. We were looking for the people that we come from. And in
Mm.
absence of that, In absence of being able to actually find those people, we created new family. And then sometimes that's through friendship, sometimes that is through partnership and having new babies and all that kind of stuff. But that sense of cousinness or family that we have amongst Black people is that's where it comes from. We don't know we're not related. So we start from this idea that we might be in some way, shape, or form. At least that's the way that it always kind of came out to me as I was growing up. And so the amount of time, like I always knew there was I always knew I was being seen as Black, at least, if not my whole mixed self, by Black people, if they referred to me as cousin or called me their little cousin or their little
Mhm,
sister or something
mhm,
like that. I knew
mhm,
that was the case. Because they could see it in me and they were welcoming it. When I started calling people on the show cousin, it was an extension of that too, an extension of the Blackness. Even though I know that not everybody on the show is mixed with Black, we also have this weird identity thing of we don't have a tribe. As mixed people, we don't have
that's right.
a tribe of our specific mixes necessarily. But what we do bond over as mixed people is that we are mixed and that we at least understand what it's like to come from different cultures, how some of those cultures overlap and how some of them don't. We understand having family that gets along and doesn't get along based off of race and ethnicity sometimes.
Mhm,
We have that's our shared bond. That's the thing that makes us family on the show. And therefore, cousins, I basically just co-opted the idea that I grew up with in terms of my
mhm,
Blackness and spread that into militantly mixed. That being said, I know militantly mixed always has somewhat centers Blackness. And that is because I am a mixed Black person. So I can't separate necessarily my Blackness from my mixedness. And that's why, and because Blackness is what I was the predominant culture of my life, it is the one that like centers across all the
mhm.
episodes, even if I'm speaking to someone that's not necessarily a mixed Black person. It doesn't exclude non Black mixed people. It doesn't at all, as you can see from my guest list. But um, I couldn't believe well, not that I couldn't believe it. It's just that when I was asked the question, I was like, oh, I didn't even think about having to explain that to people who didn't necessarily come
Yes.
from us, from Blackness,
Mhm,
from mixed Black or Blackness in general. So I guess I'm putting that out here for anybody who maybe was just like, oh, that's cute, we're cousins, but that like it's a deeper meaning. It's a thicker meaning, I want to say,
mhm.
emotionally into why I refer to my guests and my listeners as cousins because we don't have a tribe. We're creating our tribe.
We're creating a tribe, and I love that. I've always loved that about the way you do it. And to just speak briefly, I'm sure we can deep dive into this in future episodes because I'm also mixed Black. And I think about this a lot as you do because I spend so much time in the mixed space and mixed spaces,
Hmm.
which aren't at all homogeneous.
No.
But we are, but I'll call it an explanation. Maybe for some people, it's a rationale or justification. But like you, for the same reasons, and I'm just like you, heavily Black identified, um, tend to center Blackness. But also, I think that no matter what your mix is, and I do say this to people, and not in a hierarchical sense or a dominant sense, but if if you're if part of your mix is a person that's not white, then it is essential. I think it's essential for all, whatever term we're going to use, people of color, people who aren't white, to understand it's to their benefit to understand Blackness, because Blackness is the dominant political determining force in the United States.
Mm.
The United States was built on this binary,
Mhm.
on this power structure of white supremacist dominance and anti-Black racism, and everything evolves out of that. And I'm not saying that because my mix includes Black. I'm
Mhm.
saying that because that's just
That's
objectively
just yeah.
different places. Like you're saying, if you were in Japan, it'd be a different dynamic. But different places have different dynamics, even within this transatlantic slave trade diaspora we're talking about. Brazil versus Puerto Rico versus Cuba versus Haiti versus Dominican Republic, et cetera, et cetera. There are variances, But Blackness, if you look at it, Blackness dominates consciousness, i.e. the Filipino woman who was inviting you into the family and then fired you from the family immediately. That even in places and communities and among people where Blackness isn't necessarily present in somebody's DNA or
Mhm.
cultural experience, Blackness is still a determining factor all over the place, especially in this country, whether or not actual Black people are involved or
Yeah.
actual Black DNA is. Would you
Yeah,
agree?
it feels global, like, it's, and it's
I think it's pretty
insidious, right?
global.
Like, it's, the power that white supremacy has,
Hmm.
even in places where white isn't necessarily even a part of their structure,
Right.
is amazingly insidious. Like, it's, I don't know how else to
Yeah,
describe it.
no, that's exactly
It's
it.
so
It is.
insanely
And
embedded,
it's
it's so
and it's
powerful.
always, it always translates to anti-Blackness, and then any other antis come from out of that. But
Yeah,
whenever you dig and dig and dig, right, the quote
yeah,
unquote bottom line, the connecting tissue is anti-Blackness.
yeah. Because even in a country where there's just brown people, how blackness comes into play is in darker skinness, which
Yes.
is
Yes.
the, redheaded stepchild, if you will, of
Colorism.
anti-blackness, right? Like,
Yep.
it's a part of the same story. That's what they're saying. Darker
Absolutely.
is wrong in their case, or in their perspective or whatever. I hope that I see it more now that we're fighting against that, collectively, and we're
Hmm.
honoring darker skin,
Hmm.
and celebrating melanin more now than even at any point earlier in my life.
Hmm.
So, also, I'm born at the tail end of the '70s, so I miss out on the that wave of pro-Blackness too.
Well, it's much
Um
more public. The conversations are public for the first time in a
Yeah.
sustained,
Yeah.
ongoing, anybody can jump in kind of way.
Yeah.
Thanks to the digital world and social media, and then also awareness of mixedness, which is why we can even talk about this. So for instance, 7, 8 years ago, when I started writing my mixed memoir, I was meeting with African American woman who was an editor at a major house and who had published my previous books. She had worked on some of my previous books. We were just having a casual lunch. And I just told her about the memoir. I wasn't pitching her the memoir.
Mhm.
You might want to publish it. It was too new. And I said, I'm just starting to
Yeah.
conceptualize it. And what was interesting was her immediate response. She's published a lot of very famous authors and books and everything. Her immediate response was, there's no market for that.
Yeah.
And I was like, now, what I realized, and I didn't get into a debate because there was no point, but what I realized, it stuck with me because I realized that even back then, before we had a mixed TikTok and all the things, militantly mixed, all things we have now, I knew there was a market, but I understood why she didn't.
Yeah.
How would she know? She wasn't in these streets, as we say.
Yeah.
And at the time, 90% of my interactions with mixedness came from Facebook groups
Mm.
that I was in. And so, that's another that did not compute. But I didn't get upset when she said it. I said, oh, okay, I can see how she'd say that from the big New York publishing ivory tower.
Mhm.
And, where she still has to go fight for Black books to get published by established
Yeah.
best-selling authors. She's still got to go fight in her
And
pitch.
that's that slice of the pie thing
And
that
this like
drives me
theme
crazy.
is
Yeah.
so niche. So that was one reason I decided to go on and independently publish the memoir. But that also does not compute. But I think all of these things tie in so beautifully. And all of these have to do with our identities, our consciousness, to go all the way back to you and the baby at the airport.
Mhm.
Um, and like I said, that once you share your story,
Elizabeth Smart.
Elizabeth, thank you, your Elizabeth Smart story, I was like, well, girl, that makes you could have led with that.
I
Like,
didn't even think about, like, honestly, that really didn't pop in until as I started talking about it. I'm like, "Oh, wait, okay. There's
well,
probably a
yeah, like,
thread. There's a thread
yeah.
here of
So I'm
something."
not even sure. So I don't know. Better people than us can chime in when they hear this and view this and let us know. I don't even know if in your case I'd still call it a bias. because
Okay.
it's not uninformed. It came from experience.
I had an experience, yeah.
Yours came from experience.
And in
Mine
this
might
case,
be
it's
a
an
bias.
overlap between that experience with Elizabeth Smart and the fact that me as a mixed person who centers Blackness in my own life will find concern at I'm not gonna deny it. I find myself being far more concerned about the welfare and wellness of Black children than other children. I That's just the case. Like, and
Right.
it's because of what I see, what I grew up seeing. Black children don't receive the same amount of resources. They don't have the same amount of access. And even in affluent spaces, which I didn't start to be around until I was working in tech, when I was an adult, even in those spaces, I see I see the discrepancy, the being
Mhm.
the only brown in a room in an executive suite or something like that. I know that it continues on. So
Yes.
um I want to say that it's hard to view the Elizabeth Smart thing through anything other than hindsight. Like, hindsight makes that feel a lot scarier than I think I felt in the moment. But in my experience with a child in the airport yesterday, I think I had such a visceral reaction because my concern was I'm looking at a Black child, or I'm assuming this child to be at least mixed Black,
Mhm.
and I was concerned. Like, I just had a concern, and yeah, like I think they're linked. I think the major overlap is that I'm a mixed Black person who grew up in Blackness and sees how Black children suffer at a what I perceive as a different, heavier weight, than
Mhm.
white children, or even let's just say non-Black children in general. It's, of course, it's from my perception and it's from what I've seen, but because I'm not saying that there aren't other children that suffer around the globe, including white children. I'm talking about my lens. I'm talking about what, the perspective that I experience and see from. And that's what happened. Like, and while it does shock me and it does raise some questions that I'll think about, and I'll probably journal in about or something like that.
Mhm.
Um I was just surprised that I had the reaction that I had. And I'm also surprised about the trajectory it took to get me to can just move on with my life too. Like, it was maybe all of 30 seconds in my head all at one time, the experience. But yet I went down this, rabbit hole in that 30 seconds that made me decide not to do anything about it. But um,
But I bet you other people did too.
I'm sure I'm not the only person that's
No,
it.
there's
It
no
was
way you're the only
such like, because even the dress of the girl didn't match. Like, if the dress of the girl matched the parent or the adults, let's just call them the adults because I don't know what their relations were. If that matched up a little bit better, it'd be like, okay, maybe this mixed Black baby spent the break with their grandparents or something like that, young grandparents or whatever. Or they are her adopted parents and they all live together, so that makes sense too. But she was fitted differently than they were.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
so it was just there was just so much about it that I only needed to take it in for a second to say, like, this does not compute. Like, it just didn't compute for me. But okay, we've run a little bit long on this one. I'm always excited and happy about our Mixed Auntie Confidential episodes. One, because I think it's adding an element to the show that I've laced in here and there, but mostly it's the experience episodes with an individual and stuff like that. But there's always issues that I think we do need to address as a community through this show,
Mhm.
that I get to do with you a lot better than if I'm doing them just by myself. And and then there's just going to be things that I'm going to learn about that I hadn't even addressed or hadn't come to yet, that are happens in the conversations you and I have offline a lot, that lead into some of these
Yes.
conversations that we end up having online. So I'm grateful again for you to keep doing this with me. I
And
appreciate
I'm
it.
grateful. And I always say this, and I mean, you're one of my best teachers. I learn something every time, whether it's our casual little messaging or
Me dropping a TikTok on occasion to you.
yeah, I got to get up on the TikTok. You want to help me? I need a tutor. You gonna be my tutor?
I mean, like I said,
Maybe we need a
we
tutor.
need a tutor. If
We
anybody
need a
would like to
tutor.
tutor us on
TikTok tutor. Hello, we need a mixed TikToker. Yeah, and I'm a boomer, so it's gonna take me a minute. So I need somebody who's patient, with boomer brain when it comes to tech. I'm good and I'm game and I do learn, but I do have that. Wait a minute, this is not my first language.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah, it's just that's not my first language, but I love this and value. But I also love this opportunity, like you said, for us to kind of freestyle, but with a theme, because there's always 100 things to talk about, which I
Yeah.
think is just so exciting. And then but you always give me insights, like even the Elizabeth Smart thing. I'm going to walk around now just going, how would this girl think she had that to me isn't even a bias. Like
It
that,
just didn't it
maybe it
just the
is.
thoughts didn't connect until we started having the
I
conversation.
know.
This
And I'm
happens to
like,
me in therapy all the time, mind you, that I'll say something and then my therapist will say, "Well, what do you think that comes from?" And I'll be like, "I don't know." And then I'll tell a story that clearly is linked. And then she'll go like, I mean, I can hear she doesn't say it, but I can see it in her eyes where she's looking at me like, "Bitch," like obviously it's right there in front of you. She never calls me that. She's
I know, but that's because you're sisterly.
Yeah, well, she just looks at me like, "I know you didn't just make me go through this whole rigmarole when you had the answer." But, like, sometimes that's what it is. It's like you gotta talk it out to get there, and I didn't make the connection until we started talking today.
I love that. Well, that's part of the I think the power of conversation is
Yeah,
we all recognize and remember. And let's face it, the ultimate goal is for all of us to look at ourselves, look at each other in new ways, fresh ways, and also start connecting dots in ways that might not be obvious in the beginning
yeah,
or even for a while, and then suddenly you'll get that ding. I think that's something you and I have in common just as people. That's how
yeah,
we move through the world. I want to know everybody's story
yeah.
all the time,
That's how I view this, like, I'm always like, I wanna collect all the mixed people, and I don't mean it in, like, kind of the gross way it sounds, like, I literally mean it, like, I've learned so much more in this short 3 and 3/4 years of doing this show. My mixedness, the fluidity at which I identify, the knowledge that I've gained, like, so many things have happened in this 3 and a quarter year or 3 and 3/4 years, I'm telling you, that I spent 40 years prior to that, 39 years prior to that, not knowing, not understanding, because I was limited to the amount of the few mixed people that I knew in my life, and because I get perspectives from all over the US and Canada, but also Brazil and Ethiopia and
Yes.
UK, and, like, I've talked to people from all over at this point. I'm There's stuff, like, there's so often where I go, "Oh," and then I'm scribbling real fast because 'cause I'm like, "Oh, that's something I didn't know that I need to look into." And, it's
Mhm.
just given me I don't know, it's almost like a shortcut of what to look for because there's too much knowledge out there. There's too many
Right.
things
We
to
can't
figure
process
out.
all this information.
And
Yeah.
if I don't talk to someone, and I think that's also to do with the conversation we had today, like, I didn't make the connection between my feelings about what my experience with Elizabeth Smart to my feelings of why did I react so strongly to seeing this little black girl with this white family, or white couple or whatever. Someone in Militantly Mixed, an episode will say something and I was like, "Oh, I didn't even think about that," because I don't come from that perspective, and I wanna do my best to share the stories, especially the ones that are apart from my experience, because
Mhm.
I don't want to be doing the same thing that general media does anyway, is there's not a market for that. And that's actually something I do want to talk about on another thing, is because
Okay.
I think legitimately you can make a claim that there is always a market for that, whatever fill in the blank
Right.
that
Right.
is.
Right. Right.
It's
Right.
just
Right.
that they can't see it. They
That's right.
cannot see it because they're only looking through, like, okay, so white people, I think it's fair to say they're only looking through a white lens. Black people are looking through a black lens and a white lens because we have no other choice. That's
Yeah.
the world we live in.
That's true.
I can't tell if there's an Asian equivalent to that. I assume there is here in the United States, but because even though I am a mixed Asian, since I do identify and experience life more through blackness, I don't feel like I'm qualified, necessarily to make a claim like that, although I assume it's the case. But, I mean, I have one podcast on just being a mixed black like a mixed black nerd. Like,
Mhm. Mhm.
we have an audience. It's a small one, but we have that audience. So there's clearly a market
Absolutely.
for everything. It doesn't have to be $1,000,000 blockbuster level audience. It
Exactly.
literally could be that there's 100 people out there who have a shared experience who don't know each other, and if all they do is see that, um, and I think that's become obvious through Encanto, the Disney, movie that's
Mhm.
come out,
Yeah,
is
you
how
see all
many.
these pictures of these
Yes.
kids of different races in front of the TV screen with the
Identifying with these
character.
mixed these different colored Colombians, right, yeah, like,
Yes.
the way the TikToks and the Instagrams and the photos, the freeze frame photos I'm seeing, and it's about the visual, right? It's less about the culture in those moments, it's about
Right.
visually,
It's
I
about
need
the
to see
visual.
someone that looks like me, and when I do, that's a big deal, and in a gross way, it's actually happened, in this, situation of the occupation of the Ukraine right now, is I saw like some world leaders, and I wish I had grabbed the quote because it just popped into my head now that we're sitting here talking about it, where he said, "I'm upset because I'm seeing people who look like me being attacked
Right.
by people who look like me."
Yes.
And it was a gross statement what he was making from what I remember from the quote, so I'll try to grab it and maybe I'll put it in the intro. But the point is like he could handle the conflict if it happened in brown spaces, but he couldn't handle the Ukrainian conflict because it was happening with people who looked like him.
Exactly.
That's a weird way to show people representation matters.
Yes, but you know what? But it's we're human. And
Yeah.
I think and that's a brilliant way to wrap up, but we're all human and subjective, and we'll close with it. Maybe we'll talk about this in the future. I'll put a note,
Put it in the
is the
notes.
fact that I never saw anybody I could relate to on a screen as I
Mhm.
was growing up. And I still really haven't seen many. So let's
Not
talk
many.
about that another time, which
Yeah.
is,
Let's get into that.
a screen representation and even then and now when we were so I'm thrilled for those kids when you see those posts, and
Yeah.
also there's a little twinge of envy.
Oh, 100%. I think everything is always laced with joy that it's happening, and, oh, man, I wish I
Oh
had that
man,
too.
what would that have been like
What would it have been like? I
what would
mean,
that have been
it's the
like?
same way that, like, when I see someone who looks like Naomi Osaka, who, while browner than me, is the closest that I feel like I
She's the
can
closest
identify
you're gonna
with
get right now.
visually,
Yeah.
and when I see her, I am emotional every time. Every
Yes.
time I see her. She's half my age and my role model because
Yes.
she's visibly Black Japanese, you know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So I think that is absolutely a thing that is important to share. Don't forget to follow Militantly Mix on social media. It's at Militantly Mix on pretty much everything. And then also do not forget to subscribe to the Mixed Auntie Confidential blog. Hit that address one more time.
Mixed Auntie dot Substack,
Substack.
one word, substack.com. Come and holler and see what we're talking about.
All right. And on that note, don't forget to be your mixed ass selves.
And practice radical self-care.
Yes.
Radical self-care.
Which is